It's such a beautiful process where, as you get closer to perfection, you're always kind of working every little bit out. It just feels like you're in complete dialogue with the glass. My name is Matthew Day Perez. I'm an artist and I work in glass. And I also think of myself sometimes as a serial creative entrepreneur in many ways. So I grew up in Chicago, lots of strip malls, and my parents would always go to the same area for chiropractic work. Next to the chiropractor was a stained glass shop. I would just wander out on my own, so I would kind of disappear for the hour. So they didn't know until I think they kind of realized something was up when I think I asked for a few dollars to like buy something. And they're like, for what? Why do you want to buy some glass? And it was like one of those little tiny hole in the wall, what you totally expect, kind of musty smelling. And it started out, I'd go in, look at all the glass, thumb through it, and then like leave. And then I do the same. So I just kept coming back every week until someone was like, oh, hi, what's your name? What do you want to, what are you doing? It was owned by three kind of elderly women, and they really took me under their wing. And so they actually gave me my first set of tools. They gave me scrap glass, and so I'd go in there every time my parents would go get their chiropractic work for about an hour. I'd go in there for an hour and make something or learn like a new skill or something. Just fell in love with the material and the sounds, the color, the smell of like grinding glass was actually really bad. And then I ended up working there later on in high school. So when I was a senior in high school, I worked there doing custom jobs and then repair work. I was making lamps and panels and anniversary gifts, just like odds and ends and things. So when I wanted to make something, I could, I'd get a few bucks to like be able to like buy new materials. Because at the time I was also making my own, I'd say quote like artwork as you do in high school. I thought it was like fine artwork. And then there was this funny little gallery in the downtown suburb that I was in, and some very eccentric woman, if you imagine like big hair and what you think of a gallerist, out in the middle of nowhere would look, I don't know how I connected with her, but I brought my portfolio through and she's like, I'll buy it all. It was like several really terrible high school things, but I think she gave me like a check for $1,000 for everything. And I thought that was like so much money at the time. And I was like, oh my God. But that was also the turning point where I was like, oh, I can make a living, I can make a career out of this, which led to the desire to study glass in college. So it was really that kind of happenstance moment, stumbling into this stained glass shop, that kind of completely altered my course in life. At the time, I was so enamored with glass, and I also was doing a lot of art classes in high school. So I kind of built a little portfolio, and it was back in the day we didn't have digital. So you'd take pictures, you go develop the photos, and you put them in a portfolio. And you go as a high schooler in the Midwest, you go to portfolio days, like at the Art Institute of Chicago. Meet with the different universities, and then I went to portfolio days as a senior, and then was admitted to ISU on the spot. It's kind of off-putting when you say, oh, I went to go study glass, right? But it's the same way if someone said, oh, I studied quantum physics. Like, what the hell is that, As an undergrad, you're learning the basic physical properties, about its, expansion and contraction, its way it reacts to heat, how it can become volatile or crystalline or different atmospheres, but it's very superficial. I think, in the glass world, there's something called the studio glass movement, where you're, not necessarily, you're kind of working with the material on a smaller scale. You're purchasing it in prefabricated metrics. So you're taking that material and then working with it already kind of turned into glass material. It's not unlike, sculpture or metal or ceramics, right, where you're learning the different processes of the material but simultaneously using it as a sculptural medium, and learning how to hone your ideas and also skill. After ISU, went to Rhode Island School of Design for my master's, and then at the end of that two-year program applied for a Fulbright, which is a travel grant to do research abroad. And I went to Australia National University, did kind of an intensive couple years researching annealing factors of shape-induced stress of large masses of glass, which is a really heady kind of giant way of thinking about how things expand and how things cool. When I was in school, it was kind of working at odd jobs, but in Australia, it was also fabricating or doing work for other folks. And then I've decided to move to New York. So, and I had visited a couple years earlier and thought to myself, I was like, this place is too crazy, I don't want to be here. But I think somebody moved to New York, and I think I was ready to leave Australia, and then they were like, we need a roommate, and I was like, sure, I'll jump on a plane and come back here. So I was 30, turning 31, yeah. Again, because I moved into a spot where it was a sublet, right? And then that person was leaving a studio to move in California. And I said, oh, I work in glass, I just finished a Fulbright. And they're like, oh, you should come by the studio. And it's an artist that works out of Red Hook, Dustin Yellen, who makes these large-scale laminated glass sculptures. And so after about a year of kind of slogging through it, I kind of came on board at his studio almost full-time as a consultant, doing a lot of the glassier things for him. And I worked there for 4 or 5 years, doing technical stuff, but I was also making my own work. And I think at the time, Heller Gallery actually picked me up and sort of represented me during that time. I actually came to Heller Gallery in New York when I was probably 22 or 23, and I actually dropped off a CD-ROM. I had no idea what I was doing, and dropped it off here at like X amount of years, almost 20 years ago. But then during the pandemic in 2020, I realized that my current business partner at Shiny Sparkle Studio, we needed a place to work, and we needed kilns, and we needed to be able to make what we were doing because we were getting a lot more inquiries. I think she was getting a lot of inquiries. I was making more work. I think people, we were just looking for somewhere to land, and that's how we started Shiny Sparkle. We had to essentially build it out from nothing. It was an completely empty space. So I think we built everything with work from doing fabrication and client work. We kind of put in a very small amount each, and then kind of were able to really grow the business. I think you call it like a bootstrap business, where you're just constantly reinvesting in the space and into the work. So after I was making kind of more daunting academic work, I think the desire was to use what was ever available in the studio. So those pieces are, layer, like kind of piles or mounds of broken refractory material that come from molds from the studio that are just kind of piled up, and then glass is laid over it and then allowed to kind of melt into it. So it kind of sags into it. And they're, either made in gradients or piles or, all different kind of formations. But that's kind of very playful gesture to kind of throw these chunks of material into the kiln. So this piece actually came from a really kind of lovely moment in the studio. Dory was cleaning up the studio, and she dropped a bucket of leftover glass material on the floor. When you walk around New York, you see these kind of like run over like beer bottles and other glass detritus that's on the street, and it kind of makes these beautiful like sprays or spritzes. It was kind of like an homage to that. So like the glass color comes from that kind of streety charcoal deep gray. Glass starts to soften after about 100 degrees above its annealing temperature. So about 1,000 degrees, you'll start to get some sort of softening. And about 1225 is when glass kind of resolves itself. It'll start to move gently. So I went a couple degrees above that 1225 mark, so 1228, and held it there for several hours to kind of allow everything to kind of soften and tack together without losing its structure. So every piece of glass still looks like the exact same shape of glass. I think the hardest thing is actually, I was talking to an old faculty member from my undergraduate days, and I think it's hard because I feel like I'm pretty positive about the trajectory of my career. I never want to say like happy, right? Because but I think positive about where everything's at. But I think it's hard because I've dreamed of showing this work in this space in New York, having a studio, having longevity in the glass ecosystem, or just in the arts full stop. But it's hard. I think the hardest thing is to okay, so what's the next big goal? So maybe I think after looking at all this work, I'll be able to plot that out. But I think it's hard when you're a youngster and you don't, you go from going from a stained glass shop to a gallery in New York. That you make that leap and it feels pretty good, but then what's the next leap?